Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jessica Reynolds. I'm the Director of the Office of Downtown Development at the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. And thank you for being with us. Today, we have Cam Yurdy, who is our brand new Downtown Development Planner with the Office of Downtown Development, who is going to be talking about local comprehensive plans. And I'm going to turn it right over, but I will say that we are so excited to have Cam on board. He's been here since, what was it, June? Yep. And he's just been a great addition to the team. We don't even notice that other guy is gone. What was his name?
What guy?
What's his name?
There's
Thomas or
Tim.
Tim Lohman. Yeah. He's gone, but we're excited to have Cam. He has a planning background experience. Also, he's worked with DCA for the past 2 years prior to our team. So I'm excited because he's had a lot of experience with other programs, with the Office of Planning, CDBG, lots of different things, Plan First communities. So he actually brings a lot of information and background and experience to our team. I think, he's been great and has just jumped right in. And if you've had the privilege to meet him, then I know you already love him. But today we're gonna let him talk about something that he knows a lot about, which is local comprehensive planning. So with that being said, Cam, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Jessica. As Jessica mentioned, I have worked with DCA for a couple of years, and prior to working with Downtown Development, I worked in the office at DCA that handles local comprehensive plans. So chances are, if you submitted a local comp plan for review in the past 2 years or so, I have read it. And you're going to see in this presentation some examples from different comprehensive plans from around the state. I checked, and I believe almost all of them are from Main Street communities. So hopefully you'll see a plan you recognize as a good example in this presentation. So without further ado, let's get started. So today's objectives for Main Street's working with comprehensive plans, I want to help you figure out how you can become involved in your local comprehensive planning process. I want to help you develop an understanding of the character areas and the land use section of the comprehensive plan, especially as it pertains to downtown areas. I want to help you become an advocate for your projects. I know we've all got different work program items that we're developing as part of our Main Street annual work program. And some of those may or may not be appropriate to go into comprehensive plans themselves. So I want to help you figure out how you can get those projects inserted into the comprehensive plans. And then also, if you have any downtown specific planning documents, I want to help you understand where those might be appropriate to be plugged into the comprehensive plan. And so hopefully we will come back to these 4 goals at the end of the presentation. And at that point, if you have any questions about one of those points or anything else, I'd be glad then to take any questions. So the first question we should ask ourselves is, why do we create comprehensive plans? The easiest and most common answer is that they're required to achieve qualified local government status. And QLG status is something, if you're not familiar with it, your mayor and city council or your county commission are definitely familiar with it, because it is what allows local governments access to different funding opportunities from a host of state agencies. In order to take advantage of CDBG or sometimes even GFA loans, or even be considered for the rural zone program, you must be a qualified local government. And so the one common requirement for all local governments to achieve that QLG status is to have a verified and approved comprehensive plan. Besides that one stick reason or carrot reason for maintaining a good comprehensive plan, the local or the land use section of the comp plan is also the basis for any local zoning or land use regulation that your community may be enacting. If you're familiar with the Zoning Procedures Act, that separate piece of state legislation sets out how zoning occurs in communities across the state, and it refers to your general plan, which is your comprehensive plan. And so the work you do in the land use section or the character area section of your comprehensive plan is the basis for that zoning. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more deep, those 2 sections, the land use and character areas, in a few minutes. And finally, it helps you prioritize the use of your resources. That is beneficial not only on a local level for identifying how you're going to spend your local tax dollars that you receive, but it also is a way to communicate that common vision and that prioritization of resources up to the state when we're looking to make funding decisions. If you've ever applied for a community development block grant, you know that you have to show how your comprehensive plan lays out the project that you're proposing and how it supports the project. And that developing a common vision really helps communicate to us and to our other state partners that look at comprehensive plans why you feel that the program or the project that you're asking for funding for fits in with your overall vision. This is a list that is linked on our website, and I've got a link coming up in a second that will pop up on the YouTube version of this presentation once we're done. But this document shows the different programs that are tied to that qualified local government status. And as you can see, it's really almost everything that we do at DCA, and then DNR and GFA also look at this on a constant basis. So a little bit of background about comprehensive planning in Georgia. Communities have been doing comprehensive plans for a long time, but the first statewide regulation of them occurs with the Georgia Planning Act of 1989. With that legislation, DCA is given the ability to create standards for local comprehensive planning, and it creates a level of uniformity across the state with what your comprehensive plans look like. There's still, as we'll talk about in a minute, a lot of options for local variation and making the plans appropriate for your community, but the Georgia Planning Act of 1989 really kind of set the statewide level of where all comprehensive plans need to be in order to help you meet that qualified local government status. The first plans developed under the Georgia Planning Act came out in the early 1990s, and every 5 to 10 years there have been some form of updates to those planning documents. As I said a minute ago, DCA developed the minimum standards for local comprehensive planning, and those standards have changed over time since the Planning Act was enacted. Our most recent revision to those standards occurred in 2014, and it's those standards that are going to help frame today's discussion about comp plans. One other thing before we dive into comprehensive plans is a question that commonly gets asked is who writes comprehensive plans? And the answer to that question can vary depending on your community. Some local governments take it upon themselves to write their own comprehensive plans, and that's great if your community has the resources and a planner on staff that's able to do this. But not all communities have that level of resources to take on a comprehensive plan update. Some communities hire consultants to do that, and that's fine as well. But we do find that the majority of local comp plans are written by the regional commissions. Those regional commissions are the 12 jurisdictions around the state, and DCA actually provides a level of funding for those regional commissions to provide a minimum level comprehensive plan at no cost to the local governments. And so if you or your community are asking about, your comprehensive plan deadline is coming up soon, and you want to know who to reach out to possibly get that process started, the regional commissions are always a good starting point. So let's talk a minute about the public participation requirement of the comprehensive planning process. Ideally, your community's comprehensive plan is going to reflect your community's vision. We consider it to be the people's plan. It's not the mayor's plan or Councilman Jones's plan. It is the plan of the citizens of the community that the plan is drafted for. We feel that a robust public participation program allows for public ownership of the plan. And when you have that public investment in the plan, you're able to develop buy-in and then encourage the use of the plan by the local elected officials who are going to depend on those constituents in 2 to 4 years to get reelected. So we want to see a comprehensive plan that has very robust local involvement, and really there are a couple of key components that go into that public participation. Communities must identify stakeholders and the different participation techniques, and then actually have the participation techniques occur. So if there's a survey that they're proposing, or if there are a couple of public input meetings, we at DCA ask that process be documented in the comprehensive plan itself. Two changes that came about in the 2014 update to the rules is that each steering committee for the comprehensive plan must include elected officials and economic development folks. And the economic development folks are you, the Main Street managers, potentially. That could also include Chamber of Commerce folks or countywide development authority personnel. But if your community is prioritizing downtowns, and if you have a Main Street program, you likely are prioritizing downtown, it makes sense that the Main Street managers or board members from the Main Street board be involved in that comprehensive planning steering committee. So that's one of the first ways that you can become involved, is making sure you're at the table during the planning process. And to ensure that you're able to provide substantive feedback and in that process, we're going to talk now about the actual standards and what the comprehensive plan structure looks like. So with the revised planning rules, we developed a setup for the plan that involves different elements. There are 3 elements that we'll touch on in a second that each community has to complete. And then there are additional elements that some communities have to complete, but others do not, while all communities are encouraged to complete different elements that are appropriate for your community. The comprehensive plan does have to be updated every 5 years, or at least looked at. Some of the elements may require more in-depth revisions each 5 years than others. If you have familiarity with the comprehensive planning process prior to 2014, you may recall that it was a 10-year update. With every 5 years, you were only required to update your work program. But the revised rules did change that and say that every 5 years, you need to take a look at the entire document and change the parts that are relevant. So this is a nice graphic to kind of conceptualize what the different elements are and how they relate to some communities. As you see there at the top, the 3 elements in green are the core components of your comprehensive plan, and that's your community goals, your needs and opportunities, and your community work program. The 5 elements listed below that in the orangish brownish color are the elements that are required for some communities, but not all. And then we have a list of possible examples of additional elements that are optional for any community. What you'll notice about those elements is that we don't have any specific guidance on what those look like coming from DCA, but that's really one of the areas where we feel that you have the opportunity to make those elements whatever is appropriate for your community. And for the purposes of this presentation, I added a generic downtown element. What that looks like, we are glad to provide some feedback if you are in that process and want to include a downtown element in your comp plan. I'm glad for you to reach out to me and ask questions. But again, we don't have any specific guidance on what that looks like, but it is definitely something to consider as you're going through your comprehensive plan update. So we're going to dive deeper into those 3 core elements that are required for all communities. If you step back and think about the 2 elements, the community goals and the needs and opportunities, you can kind of consider them as a way of priority setting. Your community goals element is going to be the place where you talk about your community's long-term vision. These plans are typically made and developed on a 20-year cycle. So when you're developing your plan in 2018, you're typically thinking about what your community is going to be in the year 2038. And so that community goals section is really the part where you take and see, look at some long-term trends, look at some data that may tell you what changes are going to occur in your community over the next 20 years or so. And then you also identify the things you want to occur in your community over the next 20 years or so. That needs and opportunities element is really the time to start thinking about what are the changes that are going to be happening, what are the challenges we're going to see and need to address in the next 5 or so years. And so the combination of those long-term community goals and those shorter-term, more immediate needs and opportunities really funnel down into the community work program. The community work program is the section of the plan that actually talks about projects, the implementation activities that are going to help address your short-term needs and opportunities in order to achieve your long-term community goals. As you're doing your plan update, or as someone is helping you with your plan update, please be aware that DCA and/or the Regional Commission can provide certain statistical and demographic data upon request. Really, we've seen the regional commissions take a lead in this data provision over the past couple of years. They have a more nuanced view of what data are appropriate for each community because they're a little bit closer to you day in and day out. But we do have the ability to provide that as well if needed. One, I've got an acronym in here that I didn't explain. So you'll see the second bullet there says QCOs, provide useful conversation starters. So a number of years ago, DCA developed a list of quality community objectives, which are 10 certain traits that we see as common amongst communities that have been successful. And those are on our website, and I will make sure that we have a link to that in the YouTube version of this document or of this presentation as well. But really, there are ways to start thinking about different aspects and characteristics of your community, and really are useful in that public involvement, those public meetings, to help start the conversation about where your community wants to go and how you want to develop. So looking at that community goals element, again, this is one of the 3 components that are required for all communities, and the 2014 version of the rules set aside a couple of different ways that your community can meet our minimum standards and plan for your future. You can have a general vision statement, or you can simply list community goals or community policies. The 4th option there is one we'll talk about in a bit, and that's the development of character areas and a defining narrative. And ideally, over the course of multiple plan updates, you're going to create this community goals element once, and then every 5 years when you do an update, you're going to check back in and make sure the longer term goals are still appropriate. But assuming there's continuity in your local leadership and your community's trends, then you're not going to do a lot of changes at every 5-year update cycle. So our rules are very, looking at briefly the different ways to satisfy this requirement, our rules are sort of open to interpretation when we talk about how you develop this part of your plan. But if you're going to take the general vision statement option, we want to see a plan that paints a clear picture of what you want to be and describe the different development patterns that you're going to encourage within your community. I have seen in the 75 to 80 comprehensive plans I've reviewed while working here, I've seen a whole host of ways that communities have done this. I think we have, we don't have an example of a general vision statement in this presentation, but really what we want to see is we want to see you use the plan language and then some pictures as well to communicate to us and to communicate more importantly to your general public in your community how you see the community developing over the course of 20 or so years. What we really like to encourage, if folks are going to use the goals or the policies method of structuring the community goals element, is we like to see a combination, a natural flow of goals, which are a set of broad overarching ideals that you're striving for, that are supported by different policies. And so that's policies that provide guidance and direction to local elected officials so that when they're making decisions in a manner that support those long-term goals and are not working detrimentally to them. And then those policies are further supported by implementation activities, which you would find in like the community work program. So specific projects that have a clear listing of the either the capital expenditures to be made or specific programs that are to be developed, and some assigning of responsibility as to who is going to undertake those implementation activities. And so this is kind of the hierarchy that we like to see. Then again, our rules are a little bit more permissive, so this isn't the hierarchy that you have to follow, but this is a pretty good framework, we feel, for any sort of planning process.
Now, Cam, could some of these like goals that you're talking about right here, could they line up with what you have in your Main Street work plan?
Very much so. And if you're Main Street manager and you're involved in that public stakeholder process, and you're on the steering committee, I would highly encourage you to look at the goals and policies that you've set for your Main Street organization and see how you can work them into the comprehensive plan, either verbatim or adopting them slightly so that they're a little more broad and can speak to the community as a whole. Okay. And again, that's a local dynamic communities have to figure out, but definitely the Main Street goals that you have for your Main Street organization are goals that can be worked into the comprehensive plan. Cool. Great question. And this is an example of what that could look like. If you want to attract new businesses that are good for your community and complement your vision, a policy might be to collaborate with the development authority or the downtown development authority to provide financial incentives. And then that could, an activity that could result from that could be increase the existing facade grant program by 5%. So these are just examples. This is not a prescribed goal, policy, and action item, but it's just a way that that process can flow. Again, the rules do permit you to just simply list the community goals that you're going to achieve, but we have seen that communities who do this and take this option tend not to have the necessary groundwork laid to actually follow up on those goals long term. We do have a couple of example community goals, and if you'll recall earlier, I talked about the quality community objectives that DCA has developed. What these list of example community goals are simply the first line of each of our QCOs. The way that those QCOs are structured is such that the first line really sets a goal, and then the second or third line talk more about policies that can support that goal. And so I do encourage you to take a look at those QCOs and see how they may be appropriate or not appropriate even for your community. Also, you can still list just community policies, but again, if they're not in that framework of goals, policies, action items, they tend not to be as helpful. This is an example of a policy statement from the community goals section of the City of Noonan's comp plan that was developed back in 2016. And if memory serves correctly, this is actually a part of that overall goals, visions, implementation activities framework. But Noonan will successfully blend its historic character and Southern charm with progressive and unique lifestyle opportunities to promote the cultural arts, educational excellence, and sustaining economic development. Very, very good and forward-thinking policy statement there. And this is, again, looking further at that framework for how they continue to flow that down into the policies and action items. All right, so if you recall, I talked briefly at the beginning of the community goals section about how the character area in defining narrative can satisfy that requirement of the comprehensive planning rules. And I think this section is really a unique opportunity for Main Street organizations and folks who care about downtown, because what a character area is, it's a specific geographic area within the community that has some sort of unique or special characteristics that you want to preserve or enhance, or it has the potential to evolve into a unique area, but it requires special attention due to unique development issues. I think that describes almost every one of our downtowns in Georgia. Every one of our downtowns is a unique and special place that does require some sort of special attention to make sure that it either evolves into the highest of its potential or doesn't fall into disrepair and become a non-focus point of the community. And so really what the character area's way of satisfying the community goals element does is it allows you to focus in on those various special districts within your community. Downtown is but one of a number of potential areas like that. And so, yeah, we'll go through, I think, and look at some examples of some character areas. This is another one of our Main Street communities, Tybee Islands. This is an example from, I think, their 2008 comprehensive plan, which, while it was developed under slightly different rules, the concept of character areas has remained consistent. And so what they have done here is they've identified different portions of their community that are arts and entertainment, the Back River neighborhoods, so that's probably some residential areas, the beaches, which have their own sort of unique challenges. And then I think they've got the historic Battery neighborhood and, yeah, the Strand historic downtown business district.
And you can have more than one character area? Yes,
actually, if you're going to do the character areas section, then your entire community needs to be covered by a character area of some shape, form, or fashion. And I would highly encourage you to advocate for a downtown character area to be included in that, if that's the avenue that the comprehensive plan in your community is going. Also, another one of our Main Street communities, the City of Brazelton. They have actually looked at character areas for their community, and and giving them names which are appropriate and help communicate the idea of what these areas are. Your historic downtown, that's pretty straightforward. Industry and jobs, who doesn't like that? Your gateway commercial and your activity centers, those are very clear names. And so one of the things you want to do with your character areas is make sure that you're communicating to folks who both live in your community and folks who may be thinking about living in your community or locating a business in your community, what the characteristics of those character areas are. Just another portion of that map from Brazelton. Some things that are required when doing the character area is that there's a defining narrative that comes along with the character area map. And so that's where you're going to really get into the details about what makes that area, that portion of your community special. So you want to have a detailed discussion of the character area, want to illustrate it with photos and talk about the allowable land uses and any implementation measures you're going to use to help that character area either stay like it is currently or bring it up to its fullest potential. And this is some more text from that town of Brazelton character area. You see they've done a very good job. I'm not going to read it to you here, but they've done a very good job of painting the picture of what historic downtown looks like for the city of Brazelton. They got some implementation measures such as facilitating mixed use, creating business recruitment and retainment strategy in downtown, and a mix of housing choices. So they've really done a good job here fleshing out what that area of their community looks like. So moving on to the needs and opportunities, this is really, as I said at the beginning, the place where you talk about that short-term challenges and opportunities that you hope to address in the next 5 years or so. And so this would be one of the sections that should be updated every 5 years. And our rules do require that you undergo a SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's a common analysis that is it's frequently used in the business community. And we feel that it's helpful to identify those needs and opportunities. It's a helpful process to undergo to identify those needs and opportunities.
And if you're still not familiar with it, we actually have an example of it in our new manager's handbook that you can reference and has example questions and things like that that can be helpful to you.
Yeah, and that's great because helping to frame that discussion around a SWOT is as important to actually listing out the needs and opportunities that result from it, because without the good discussion and community involvement in that, you may not get an accurate representation of what your needs and opportunities really are. Again, our rules require that you involve community stakeholders in the development of this SWOT and the development of the list of needs and opportunities. And then here's, like Jessica mentioned, this is some questions you may want to ask for each of the sections of the SWOT. This is for the strengths. What are your advantages and what do you do well? For your weaknesses, you want to ask what you do poorly or what you should avoid doing in the future. And you may want to consider the weaknesses from both an internal and an external viewpoint. What do you see in your community and what do others see in your community as your weaknesses? Opportunities, you want to look at the things that may be coming down the pipe. What are some trends that may affect your community? That could include things like technology, government policy, demographic changes, that sort of thing. And then threats, any potential obstacles you face. If you know that one of your county's big industries is shutting down, how does that impact your downtown? What does that do to the way you think about the types of businesses you're going to recruit? Or is there any certain technological changes that are going to threaten your positional advantage? I think back to railroad communities in the 1920s, right? They thought they had it made. They were set up. They were the transportation corridor. And then what came along? The horseless carriage, right? That technological change threatened their position as a community of importance. And so it really made them have to think differently about how to sustain their community long term. So those are the sort of questions you want to be asking as you're going through your SWOT analysis. One of the things you want to remember is that you want to be as comprehensive as you can. And that we do encourage a list of needs and opportunities in the development of the comp plan, but you can definitely be creative. One of the things that I've seen communities do is identify certain data trends like aging population in their community or changing demographics or the reduced amount of car travel that's a national trend, and then identify any needs and opportunities which result from those data trends. So there's a ton of different ways you can structure this, but really want to make sure that it makes sense for your community and that it really communicates the actual needs and opportunities of your community. The City of Covington had a very good needs and opportunities section. They list their needs and opportunities in bold, but then they give a little bit of discussion to kind of give some context to what that is. Looking at the service demands, meeting the service demands of an explosive population growth. They talk about the fact that they have experienced population growth, and they expect that to continue. So there are going to be some increased demands on public services and housing stock, those sorts of things. So they're already starting to give some context to that need or that opportunity. Again, this is just another framework. As I mentioned earlier, some communities have identified a trend and then any needs and opportunities that result from that trend. And that's a really good way to structure those as well. So moving on to that third required element for all communities is the community work program. And this is where we talk about everybody's favorite thing, which is projects and money. The community work program is, again, it's one of the 5-year components of the comp plan. So it's one of the things you are going to want to look at every 5 years. In fact, at the end of each 5-year planning cycle, we require that you give a report of accomplishments, basically a status report or status update on the previous set of community work program items. And so what you really want to do is you want to look at those projects which have historically been in your comp plan, see, have you completed them? Are they still a community priority? Are you going to keep them in the new version of the work program if they were not completed in the last 5 years? And then this is really where I would encourage you as a Main Street community to be an advocate for your projects. You really want to know and have a good grasp about the things that downtown specifically needs, the different infrastructure requirements or different programs that you want to see enacted that are going to require city or county support. And so when it comes time, as you're on the stakeholder committee for your comp plan, when it comes time to talk about projects, it's best if you have that list of priorities that you want to see enacted ready to go, because I've worked on developing comprehensive plans before I came to DCA, and those people who have projects ready to go tend to be the ones who get projects in the work program. If you're sitting around in the meeting trying to come up with ideas, then you're not really showing that you're prepared to take ownership or be a partner in different projects or programs that you want to see enacted. So having that list of items ready to go and bringing that to the table, they may or may not get into the final document, but at least having them there and prepared and having a good rationale for why you feel that the work program items that you're proposing support the community vision and address either the need or the opportunity from the other portions of the plan is really a great place, a great position to be starting that discussion from. And so like the community work program is like any sort of work program that you see in a planning document. We really want to see in the report of accomplishments, we want you to take a good look at those projects from the past 5 years and see, have you done them? If not, are they still a priority? And if you're not going to continue the project, give us an explanation as to what's happened, what's changed in the community. And really the reason for that being a requirement in the planning rules is not so much that DCA cares whether or not you've completed the projects. We care, but we really want to see that you're communicating that rationale to your community stakeholders, to the general public in your community. With the work program, again, you want these to be specific activities, specific projects or programs or ordinances that you feel are necessary to achieve your community goals. We have, the Office of Planning here at DCA has made it a strong point of emphasis to encourage actual policy statements to be included, not in the community work program, but in the policies or the community goals section of your plan. And so really what the Office of Planning is looking for here is actual projects that you can quantify with a time frame for enacting, a budget, or assign responsibility to different people in the city or different partners from throughout the community with this. Again, this is reiterating what I just stated there, that you want to give a description of the activity, you want to talk about the time frame and who's going to be responsible, and then identifying any cost and funding sources for projects that will require those two things. We do have the Office of Planning does have a template on our DCA website that you can start with. And then again, to encourage actual projects, we want to see, we don't want to see words like encourage, promote, or consider. That's ideally things in considering, especially, is something you want to be doing during the planning process. And so when the plan is done, you want to have the actions that you've already considered and are ready to take action on. Oh, that is a little more blurry than I thought it would be. I'm sorry for that, folks. This is an example of a comprehensive community work program from a comp plan from, I think, Union City. And you'll see one of the things they do neat here is they talk about what type of activity on the left it is. So they've got some inventory and assessment, and that may be appropriate if you're getting, if you feel like it's important for Main Street to do an updated building assessment or vacant lot assessment in the downtown area. So that may be an appropriate type of activity to do. And then they also want to do, actually, it looks like this whole section from their plan is inventories and assessments. But that's good. Those are things that need to be done across the community and for a number of different projects. Okay, so we've touched on the 3 core components, and I'm going to briefly touch on the 5 optional or required for some elements, those in the middle there. Some of these have very specific requirements and very limited numbers of governments that they are appropriate for. And they also have some very specific guidance on some of them. The capital improvements element is required only for communities that charge development impact fees. If you don't know whether or not your community charges development impact fees, you can reach out to us and we can tell you. But if you don't charge development impact fees, then I would recommend not undergoing the capital improvements element development as part of your comp plan. There are separate rules that give much more detailed guidance, and this is really a heavy lift for communities that don't have to do it. So I'd encourage you to check and see if that's something that you do and if it's something that you're required to do with the capital improvements element. And if not, I would save this for the date in which that requirement does mandate that you do this. Now, the land use element is something that, while it is technically required for some, most of our local governments in Georgia do have some sort of zoning or development regulations, and the requirement in the planning rules for who does the land use element is just that, communities who have zoning or development regulations. This is something that you'll want to take a look at every 5 years. And there are two different options for how you can address this requirement. One we've already talked about, and that's the character area map and defining narrative. So if you're keeping score at home, that character area map and defining narrative can count for not 1, but 2 of your potentially required elements. That may be one reason that I'm a fan of that. If you're updating your comp plan, I think that's a good way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, but do them both well. And if you don't go with the character area map, you can always go with the traditional land use map. And we'll talk briefly about what that looks like as well. Yeah, this is just some good map making techniques that I don't know that the Main Street managers will be making the actual map for the comp plan, but it's just something good to know so that when you're looking at the comp plan, when it's in its draft form, you can make sure that some of these things are addressed. You want a map that you can clearly see, that's not blurry. For those who are coming to your community from out of town, a north arrow always helps you find your way. This is an example land use map from the city of Statesboro, and one of the things that they have done well that we'd like to highlight is it's got your traditional land use categories, your agriculture, commercial, industrial, mixed use, multifamily housing, public institutional, single family, yada, yada, yada. And if you notice, in the center of the community where land use tends to get a little more jumbled, it can be difficult to interpret what land use is assigned to what parcel. And so what they have done here is they've actually created a second map that is an inset of their downtown land use. And especially if you have a community which is not easy to see in one map, all the different parcels, and that's, any community of an irregular shape or a large size, you want to do that inset so that you can see clearly what the different land use is in downtown, and then see how that plays on itself, right? If you've got single family future land use designated for the center of your central business district, maybe that's a place that you would want to talk to your steering committee about and see, hey, maybe this is more appropriate to be mixed use or commercial or whatever, is appropriate for your community. But having the ability to clearly see what land use is being proposed to be adopted in the comprehensive plan is key to having a good discussion about it. Looking at the final three of those required for some elements, these are elements that are only required for certain communities, but these are elements that we highly encourage communities who they're not required for to at least consider undergoing them. They do have some additional data requirements, and we do allow the option in the rules to draw from already completed plans, but they are opportunities to, if you don't have those other plans already created, we do have some basic guidance in our rules for how you can undergo development of an economic development element or a transportation element or a housing element. Looking at economic development, this is going to be required for any community that's in a county that's in job tax credit tier 1. Excuse me. And there are some requirements that you either pull in the goals and objectives from the regional comprehensive economic development strategy. That's also sometimes shorthanded as the SEDS. And those documents are developed by your regional commission typically. And there are already existing documents that you can pull from, but you can also are completely at your discretion to develop your own set of economic development goals and policies, and then action items to support that. But the key takeaway here is that some of this goal creation has already been done in the SEDS, and I'd encourage you to take a look at that anyway, even if you're going to develop your own, just to know, be able to truth whether or not the things that you're developing are consistent with what the region as a whole has identified as a strategy or a goal. You can also, the thing about these optional elements is that you can, if they're optional for your community and not required, then you can sort of disperse the different needs and opportunities or goals or action items throughout the other segments of your plan as well. That's not unallowed. And eventually you want to try to develop some specific projects to support that economic development if you're going to do an economic development element. With transportation is required for any community that's within a metropolitan planning organization. And the reason it's required for those communities is because they already have an existing long-range transportation plan. You may hear it called the LRTP. And that is a document that is required by the Federal Highway Administration in order to receive those federal highway funds. Now, I know a lot of our communities, especially some of our smaller downtowns, aren't within an MPO, so some of this transportation planning has not already been done for your community. Some counties do countywide transportation planning, and that's a great place to start if you don't have access to a metropolitan planning organization plan. However, our guidance for our rules for the comprehensive plans do outline a couple of the key components that need to be considered. Parking, traffic counts, any rail considerations, and that's listed all in our rules for the comp plan.
But that could play into downtown if you're looking at like incorporating some kind of transportation or like even doing like a major streetscape overhaul, correct?
Very much
Something
so.
like that?
Yeah, that's something that you would want to at least consider if you're going to do a transportation element. Now, something like streetscape may be something that you can put into other portions of the plan.
Mm-hmm.
But if you really want to call that out as a priority that your community is really focused on, then including a separate transportation element within the comp plan is a way to highlight that as a priority, definitely.
What if you were going to be using or going for T funds? Would that need to?
So if you're going to advocate for any sort of state or federal transportation dollars, it really is a good idea to have a transportation element.
Okay.
One of the things that, and that's actually a really good point, Jessica, one of the things that GDOT does when they're looking to develop projects, when they're planning for projects, they do actually pull local comprehensive plans and see, especially what the land use sections say.
Okay.
So they can see how their proposed projects may impact the local land use decision-making process. And if you have a transportation element within your comp plan that addresses the project or addresses the type of project that they're thinking about, especially if you're not in one of those MPO areas, that is a really good indicator to GDOT of what your local priorities are. And then they can consider that as they develop their project.
Got it.
So really, really good question, really good point. Okay, yeah, just some more examples of how you can pull those other existing plans in, if they exist, into your comp plan. And the housing element, the final of those required for some communities, is required for communities that receive HUD entitlement or HUD CDBG dollars directly if they're entitlement communities. And so if you are an entitlement community and if it's required for you, you're going to have a consolidated plan that you conduct, I think, every 4 years or so. And then you want to pull in the goals and policies and projects from that document, if possible. This is an example from Valdosta, one of our Main Street communities. If you are not an entitlement community and do not have a consolidated plan already developed, again, our rules do have some very basic guidance on that. But you're welcome to reach out to us or to the folks in our housing division here at DCA. They may be able to provide some additional guidance on things you should be considering if you're developing a housing element. And if downtown housing is something that you're prioritizing, I would highly encourage you to, if not develop an additional housing element, at least make sure that's called out in your community goals and policies, and then some specific programs that you can have to support that in your in your community work program is always a good idea as well. So finally, I'm going to talk briefly about those optional elements, and we have listed a ton of different potential optional elements, but one of the ways that you can incorporate any existing downtown master planning or downtown strategic plans that you have that are fleshed out and developed, maybe something that's been adopted by your Main Street board or your DDA board, is to actually just put that planning document in an appendix to your comp plan. That does a couple of things. One, it keeps that plan in a place where it's closely tied to the other planning efforts that your community's undertaken. And two, it also serves, because the comprehensive plan is formally adopted by your local elected bodies, so either your city council or your county commission, that would then allow your either your Main Street strategic plan or your DDA plan or whatever that planning document is to be officially adopted as the statement of your local government. Now, I don't recommend you sneaking that document into the comp plan by any means, but if it's something that it's a priority to you and is a priority to your community, then I would highly encourage you to include it as an appendix or as one of these optional elements. And again, this list of optional elements that you see on your screen now is solely a set of recommendations or potential opportunities. It's by no means comprehensive. You can think of probably 1,000 different optional things to include in your comp plan if it's something that's important to your community, and downtown specific planning documents are one of a number of those. And if you're considering the rural zone program or like an urban redevelopment plan or something along those lines, there are planning requirements for those programs. And so if you have either a strategic plan for a rural zone program, or if you have a urban redevelopment plan that addresses downtown or addresses your community, those are good places to start if you're going to develop an optional element that addresses downtown. So those are good documents to have in front of you when you come to those stakeholder meetings and when you come to those public input sessions. Make sure you are aware of what documents currently exist so that you can, again, sufficiently advocate for their inclusion in the comprehensive plan. This is basically reiterating what I just stated, but if you don't have some sort of freestanding special purpose plan, using these optional elements are a good way to sort of get that process started. It may be a way to identify some core themes or goals for a downtown specific plan that may come later, or it could be a summary of existing plans for the downtown area. Okay, and this brings us more or less to the end of the presentation. I think we've addressed all of our 4 points, talking about how you can get involved, how you can become aware of what to look for in your character area section or your land use section. I think we've talked about how you can advocate for your projects, always be a strong advocate, and to be a strong advocate, you have to be involved and you have to be informed about what's already out there. And then it helps to have either existing downtown specific planning documents, or if not that, at least some ideas about projects, policies, or goals that can be incorporated in the comprehensive plan that specifically address your issues in downtowns. So with that, would we like to open it up to any questions for anybody?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. All right, guys, if you have any questions, let us know. We'll give you a second to give us a shout out. And if not, of course, Cam, we'll provide your contact information and send that out afterwards, and some helpful links.
Mhm.
And that way, if you want to take, more of an in-depth look at this, people will have that opportunity to do that as well. So it doesn't look like we have any questions. So with that being said, thank you, Cam, for being here with us today. Is there another slide after this or no?
Let's
Okay.
check.
Let's see if we're at the end. Oh,
yep, yes. Questions. There was another slide. Yay.
So with that being said, thank y'all for being here. Thank you, Cam. And like I said, we will follow up as part of the weekly newsletter, this information, and Cam will provide us some extra links and attachments for references. And again, excited to have you on as part of the team, as someone who has all this experience and knowledge, especially in this kind of stuff. And I think that, really being aware of this comp planning and having a more strategic role in it is not something that in the past has really been preached to us as, program managers. And I think it's obviously, a huge undertaking for the city, but obviously something that we can, as programs, benefit from and should be more aware of, and understanding that common language, at least what they're asking and what they're required to do.